lemon, lime, orange, tangerine, kumquat, citron, all the citrus, plus rue. Did you know? Hey y'all, welcome to episode 50 of the Growing Space podcast. In today's episode, we are closing out, it's a little bittersweet, we are closing out our year-long Meet the Plant Families mini-series. I started this series back in the spring. If you have missed some of these episodes, I encourage you to go back and listen to them all. It's a great binge-worthy mini-series for you, and they're sprinkled throughout the year. And I cover all of the common edible plant families that we can be growing at home in our growing spaces. I offer guidance on how to identify them as being members of a particular family, how to grow them, specific tending tidbits, and tips for how to harvest, and even more. So definitely go back and give those episodes a listen. I will remind you of all of them in today's show notes. And in today's episode, we have a fun one. We are going out with a bang. I couldn't not talk about this plant family. I am slightly obsessed with the members of the Rutaceae plant family. They are all of our citrus, and they are magical. Oh, I left out grapefruit. Grapefruit is also part of this plant family. So growing members of the Rutaceae plant family is going to be different for all of us, especially, where we are located geographically. I'll get into that. But they really are magical, ornamental little blessings for our spaces. And it's so fun. It is so exciting to watch them grow and produce beautiful flowers and then beautiful fruit. So tuck in. We are closing out this mini-series with a delicious, super fragrant, super delightful set of plants. So let's get started learning all about the Rutaceae plant family.
Welcome to the Growing Space podcast. I'm your host, Farmer Erin, owner of the Patio Farmer, and I believe that no matter what size space you have, you can grow food at home. Tune in every Tuesday as I share my best tips, tricks, and encouragement for tending to homegrown edible plants. I'm here to support your food growing journey. The Growing Space podcast is sponsored by Plant Club by the Patio Farmer. Plant Club by the Patio Farmer is a monthly subscription service I started in 2020. It's a membership-based opportunity to take your growing journey to the next level. With 4 different membership options, you get to decide the amount and kind of support that's right for you. All Plant Club members receive access to my online community through a platform called Circle. Having access to this platform allows members to share pictures, ask questions, celebrate harvest, and get to know each other. All Plant Club members also have access to free seeds each month, along with information on how to plant and tend to their crops, with seeding instructions and downloadable resources from the Patio Farmer's resource library. Membership starts at just $14 a month. Join Plant Club today by visiting my website, thepatiofarmer.com/membership.
Okay, so per usual, let's start off with talking about the different characteristics of these plants. And for the most part, I know rue is a great perennial herb that you can grow at home. Rue has some medicinal properties to it as well. It's a great plant. I think it's a super cute plant, and the swallowtail butterfly babies love it. So if you would like to try growing rue, give it a whirl. But in today's episode, I really want to focus on the citrus. So we're going to be talking specifically about lemons, limes, oranges, tangerines, and grapefruit, and how to grow these with success at home. So I'd like to start off with kind of giving you a rundown of different characteristics that unify these edible members of the Rutaceae plant family. So the Rutaceae plant family in general is characterized by being woody shrubs and trees. So your citrus trees, they are in fact trees. And sometimes you can grow them as shrubs, and they tend to have kind of thick, waxy, bright green leaves. And sometimes their leaves have a little bit of fragrance, but what is super impactful and super magical about these plants is their blooms. Have you ever smelled a fresh orange blossom or like a freshly opened bud of a Meyer lemon tree? It's intoxicating. I am obsessed. So, and fun little facts about Erin and the pandemic. So when it was 2020 and we were all stuck at home and limited on, where we could go and what we could do, a lot of outdoor plant centers were still open. And so I would visit them. And the way that I got through 2020, I swear, is I started collecting a lot of citrus plants and tropical fruit. So in my growing space at home, I've got all sorts of tropical fruit as well. I've got all of these citrus that I've listed. So I've got several lemons, actually. I have a lime. I have a tangerine. I don't officially have an orange or a grapefruit, but I do have a kumquat. That's another plant that we can talk about today. And then I also have pineapples and guava and a dragon fruit and several bananas. And I don't know, it's just it's a great little collection of tropical fruit plants that I have. And a coffee tree. I have a coffee tree. So the way that I got through the pandemic was I just started collecting all of these citrus in particular. In 2020, it was mainly citrus. And so, where I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, where the USDA Agricultural Zone 8A. We are just slightly too far north to be able to grow citrus outside year round. And in fact, many of those tropical plants that I just mentioned would not survive outside in our even late fall through early spring. So I invested in a greenhouse at the end of 2020 because I had so many plants. I did not have room for all of them to come inside because I also have house plants inside. So I told Marshall, my partner, I was like, well, time to get a greenhouse. So I got this really cute 6x8 greenhouse. I know, massive eye roll, a 6-foot by 8-foot greenhouse. And Marshall helped me put it together, thank goodness. And as soon as we had the perimeter outlined for it, he looked at me and he said, Erin, this is way too small for you. You already have outgrown this and you don't even have it built. And I was like, no, this is going to be great. It's going to be great. And then I filled it with all of the plants in the wintertime and he was right. I definitely outgrew it. Oh, also then I had a papaya tree and a mango and a couple of avocados, which was fun. They didn't make it. It's all a learning process. I can always have the option to try those again. So anyway, this is a big long tangent just to tell you that in the middle of winter, when everything outside is kind of dormant and struggling in the cold, perhaps, or, everything is kind of in hibernation mode in the wintertime, being able to crack the door to my greenhouse that has a little heater in it, keeping everyone nice and toasty, and smell the beautiful fragrance of my citrus trees in bloom is unreal. I can't even put words to how inspiring and how soothing it is for the plant lady soul to be able to go into a greenhouse that's full of green, lush, thriving life and smell that beautiful fragrance. So add that to your list. If you haven't smelled fresh citrus blooms, you must. It's an absolute must, and as soon as possible. So I don't know if that means that you need to go out and invest in a Meyer lemon tree today, but be sure you listen to this whole episode before you do. So these plants, to recap, these plants are woody shrubs and they produce usually bright white flowers with dewy yellow centers, and they are super duper fragrant. And they have bright green waxy leaves. So how do you grow citrus successfully at home? The citrus trees are cold hardy, which means they can survive planted outside and can grow year round outside, right? In zones 9 through 11, So 9A to 11B, or a higher number. So I am just too far, just a smidgen too far north to be able to grow Meyer lemon trees. Now, some people say that zone 8B is okay for growing these outside. So 8B would include like Charleston, South Carolina, basically the far eastern North Carolina, like the coast, the southeast coast of North Carolina, pretty much everything southwest of Columbia, South Carolina, and then into Georgia. I think Atlanta kind of spans the 8A, 8B range. I'll put a link in today's show notes so you can check and see what hardiness zone you live in and see if you're able to grow citrus yourself outside. That's the dream. That really is the dream. I would love to live somewhere a little warmer so that I could have a magical citrus grove planted directly in the ground. One day, maybe. We'll see. So if you live north of zone 8B, really to be safe, it would be 9A. But if you live in zone 8B or further south, then you can grow your citrus trees outside and find a nice cozy spot for them. If you live north of zone 8B, like I do, then you have to plant your citrus trees, any citrus, in pots to bring them inside. You don't have to have a greenhouse. I know I mentioned I have a little greenhouse. You certainly don't need a greenhouse if that feels out of reach for you right now, but you do need somewhere inside that you can bring them where they can get some kind of bright light. Sometimes it doesn't have to be constant bright sun or direct sun, but a few moments of the day in the sun is great. Honestly, the biggest consideration with overwintering your citrus inside is making sure that you don't have your citrus trees under an air vent. Our HVAC systems can be super drying for any plants, any tropical plants that we have inside, including our citrus. So that's the biggest thing when you're overwintering citrus, is that you don't put your citrus trees close to an air vent, because you'll probably find them starting to lose their leaves and defoliate, and it'll be a little stressful for them. So if you're interested, I do have a downloadable resource. I'll put the link for this in today's show notes, but it's a complete overwintering citrus guide. So if you do live in a colder climate like I do, but you still want to have your citrus, maybe that would be a good investment for you. It's not too much of an investment. It's like a cup of coffee. So if you can swing a few bucks, it's definitely worth it to have that resource and that information at your fingertips for overwintering your citrus. But that's kind of the big number one thing about growing citrus at home, is you really need to know if they're hardy in your zone, and that will dictate if you're planting it directly in the ground or in a big pot or container. I would guess that most of you are going to be growing them in pots and containers. Now, when you're choosing a pot for your citrus trees, you want to keep in mind how heavy that pot is, especially if you're going to be moving it, right? You can get things like casters to put on the bottom. You can get saucers to put underneath the pot to help keep things kind of cleaner and tidier once you bring your plants inside for the winter. But you want to keep in mind how much that pot weighs when it's empty, because once you fill it with soil and then you put a big plant in there and then you start watering it, it's going to get pretty heavy. So I like to use like a heavy duty plastic or resin. And my favorite places to go for pots, honestly, is the big box stores. Yeah, I know. Like Lowe's or Home Depot, or sometimes if you go at the end of summer to like a Home Goods or At Home, find yourself a nice big pot. Now your pot should have holes in the bottom, should allow for drainage. That's really important. While these plants are tropical plants and they like having moisture, they don't like drying out completely, but they like kind of having these big inundations of water, it is really important that you have drainage holes in the bottom of your pots so that water can flow through. That's one of my biggest pet peeves, if I'm honest, about shopping for pots sometimes, is these companies who work with plants, like they provide supplies for plants and they don't put holes in the bottom of their pots. It drives me nuts. I don't understand it. But anyway, you want a fairly large pot as well, right? So you want to think that this plant ideally is going to stay in this pot for a very long time, a couple of years, right? And if not more, like this plant could live there for the next 10 years. So make sure you get a big pot, like one that's maybe 24 inches in diameter. It can be bigger, just kind of balancing that with you having to move this pot around, twice a year, hopefully. And if you live with other people and they can help you move it, that is super. Teamwork makes the dream work. So once you have your pot figured out, you want to get a high quality potting soil, that has lots of drainage built into it. It's nice, light, fluffy potting soil. You want to fill your pot all the way up, nestle that little tree right on in, and water. You probably want to water your container citrus. I would say in the summertime, you could easily be watering 3-4 times a week, if not daily. I mean, that's up to you, right? I have an automatic irrigation system, and so they get a little bit every day, plus the rain. But I would say like at a minimum, maybe 3 times a week in the summertime. And then in the winter, honestly, maybe once a week, maybe every other week. Like you can really stretch out how often you're watering the citrus in the winter. They don't need nearly as much. Anytime you're growing food in containers, making sure that you have a regular feeding schedule in place is going to be super helpful. It's going to help you be more successful and your plants be healthier and more productive for you. So when you're feeding your citrus plants, this is something that you can do every 8 to 12 weeks. So you don't have to feed your citrus as often as you feed your other plants. I would say like maybe like once, maybe twice a season, but like the 8 to 12 week mark is great. And you want to use a plant food that is specific for citrus plants. And of course, I got you. I'll put some links in the show notes for you for some different citrus plant foods that I recommend. And just, a small handful of one of these dry granular plant foods at that cadence every 8 to 12 weeks is really going to be supportive for your plants and help them grow and thrive and produce those beautiful, delicious flowers, which then turn to fruit. Now, let's talk about those flowers and those fruit. Like most fruit trees, your citrus plants, your members of the Rutaceae plant family, will take 3+ years to produce a first fruit for you. So when you're shopping for these different trees, and I would recommend finding a trusted plant store, greenhouse, nursery to purchase your citrus trees from. I do have some clients who have started these trees from seed, but just remember it takes 3 years. So if you start it from seed, you have at least 3 years to go before you get a first fruiting attempt. And if you buy a plant that's already been growing, if you find a plant that has flowers on it or maybe some little fruits on it already, those are great indications that's telling you that that plant is much, much closer to the 3-year age, if not older. So that's a little tip for when you're shopping. You can also try asking the retailer before you purchase if they know how old the tree is that you're about to buy. So these trees, they take their time, right? They're perennials and it takes a lot of energy to produce a fruit. So they take about 3 years to produce a first fruiting attempt. And I use the word attempt because if you have these trees at home and you've reached the 3-year mark and you're really excited because you're going to get some citrus and you see the flowers bloom and you're like, oh my gosh, yay, there's a flower. I'm going to have citrus. This is going to be the best thing. And then you see like a little lemon start to form right in the middle of that flower. And then a couple weeks go by and that little teeny tiny lemon starts to look a little funny. It gets a little grayish, purplish, and then it falls off. And you think to yourself, oh my gosh, I have waited all this time for my citrus tree to produce a fruit. I had the flower. It smelled so good. I was so excited. And now this little baby lemon has fallen off. What have I done wrong? What's going on? Please, someone explain this to me. I'm here to explain it to you. So what happens here is the citrus tree is, it's never produced fruit before. This is the first time it's produced fruit. And sometimes the trees have like a false fruiting where they're really working on building the strength of those junction points from where the fruit forms and the rest of the tree. And so sometimes they need a little trial run to build up their strength. And so that's what that is. So if you see, your first fruiting fall and not get that big and fall off of the tree, I'm not saying that all of them will do that, but if that happens, don't worry. The next time the tree fruits, you will be much more successful in producing actual fruit. It's a little trial run. Now, you'll also notice that you have a lot of flowers, and these flowers require pollination. So the more you can do to increase the pollinators that are around your plants, the more successful you might be with that first fruiting. And in fact, the more pollinators you have, the more successful you'll be with all of your fruiting, right? So it's really great to make sure that you have lots of pollinators around, landing on those delicious little flowers and pollinating your citrus trees. It's a game of patience when we grow citrus at home. It takes a lot of time, takes a lot of care and attention and love, but the reward is so great. Okay, so now is the point in which we talk about pests and disease with the Rutaceae plant family. There are a handful of super common pests and one particular fungal disease that are pretty standard, pretty common with the members of the Rutaceae plant family and your citrus. So we're going to start with the pests because one of these pests is actually a transmitter for the fungal disease. And I say all of this just so that you are one step wiser, right? You know what to expect, you know what to anticipate, and you have tools and knowledge at your disposal to walk you through how to treat for these issues, okay? The first pest that I would like to talk about with the Rutaceae plant families is scale. Now, scale is a really interesting little bug. It's an armored insect. So a lot of times when clients have scale, they'll reach out to me and they'll be like, what are all of these abrasions? Or what are all these little marks? What are all these little bumps, these growths on my citrus tree? And I tell them, oh, that's scale. It's actually an insect. And it's got like this hard outer shell. And it doesn't even look like a bug. It really does look like some kind of growth on the plant, but it's an insect. And a lot of times you'll see scale forming at the very tippy top of your citrus trees, close to the new growth, more tender growth. And scale can be fairly challenging to get rid of. The best ways that I have found to treat for scale is to remove the parts of the plant that are most affected, where you have these like big clusters of scale, because you never just have one scale bug. Never. You always have like a cluster of them on your plants. So I usually cut off the parts of the plant that have the most scale. The good thing about working with perennials and cutting or trimming perennial plants is that they'll just regrow, right? So you make these cuts, but the plants, it might stunt them a little bit, but it's a really effective way of getting rid of the scale. So you cut back the areas that have the most amount of scale. Then you go in with a little paper towel, or maybe you get some disposable gloves, and you go in and you start squishing or rubbing off any of the other scale that you see. I know that I said that they have a hard outer shell, but they're pretty easy to like rub off or squish. Again, paper towel and disposable gloves. are wonderful tools for you here. And then once you've gone through and you've manually removed even more of the scale, you can do a neem oil treatment for the whole plant. So you just go in, very lightly spray down the areas where you see the scale or have seen the scale. You want to try to avoid the flowers anytime you're using neem oil or an insecticidal soap. You want to avoid the flowers because pollinators land on the flowers, and these products can hurt our pollinators as well, the bugs that we're trying to treat. So avoid your flowers, but just give the plant a thorough spray down with neem oil. And that is a pretty hefty, a pretty solid scale treatment. Now, the next pest, we've actually already talked about this pest. We talked about this pest when we were talking about the Lamiaceae plants or our perennial herbs, and that is the silverleaf whitefly. So whiteflies also love citrus trees, and they usually show up around like mid to late summer. They'll feast on the sap that's in the leaves, and they like to hang out on the undersides of the leaves. And then as they're feeding on the leaves from underneath, there's a little scar that starts to show up on the top of the leaf where they were snacking. Now, that can be frustrating just with the appearance of your plant. It can impact photosynthesis. What these whiteflies can also do is they can transmit something called sooty mold. Now, sooty mold is something that I have been battling with my citrus trees for going on 2 years now. It's kind of a constant battle. Actually, this weekend, I'm going to do a sooty mold treatment. I hope to do 2 or 3 sooty mold treatments before it's time to move everybody into the greenhouse, which, I should have mentioned this already, but we'll take a little detour. So you want to move your citrus trees inside once nighttime temperatures are below 55 degrees. That's kind of the cutoff for their tolerance. So once we start having nighttime temperatures, in the lower 50s, that's when you want to move your citrus trees inside. So for me, that's usually like October sometime. And when I'm recording this, it's August. I have 2 months to do several sooty mold treatments. I should probably shoot for like 2 or 3 of those treatments before October. Because the whiteflies land and they bring with them the sooty mold. And the sooty mold, it looks like soot. It really does. It's like this black, dusty looking mold that affects the leaves, sometimes the fruit, but affects the leaves primarily of your citrus plants. And the sooty mold, it doesn't necessarily kill the plant, but it does prevent the plant, in severe cases, it prevents the plant from conducting photosynthesis, which of course is super important. That's how your plants get the energy, right, from the sun to produce fruit. So for fruiting plants, especially, like we really want everyone to be photosynthesizing and producing those big fruits for us. So the way that you can do a sooty mold treatment, or my approach to treating for sooty mold, you take water and Dawn dish detergent, and you make a higher concentration than if you were mixing water and Dawn for pest control. So usually I think it's like 32 ounces of water to like half a cup or a cup of Dawn, so a decent amount. And you mix this in the pump sprayer, and you thoroughly coat your citrus trees. The way that this is effective is Dawn has a lot of adhesive properties, and so it sticks to those waxy leaves, those waxy citrus tree leaves. And then as the Dawn is hanging out there and adhering a little bit, it's not going to be like stuck, but it definitely lingers. And as it's lingering, it's picking up little sooty mold with it, right? So you coat the plant in this water, the soapy water, and then you allow the plants to dry out completely. And it doesn't really take as long as you might think it does. So usually what I do is I'll go out, I'll line up all my citrus trees, I'll mix my soapy water, I'll spray everybody down first thing. I'll wait maybe like an hour and a half after I've sprayed everyone down. Usually I'm doing other things, with my plants too. Like I might be weeding or clearing or planting or harvesting. And then I come back and I spray down those citrus trees. And you want to spray with some force. Like I usually use one of the more, maybe not jet, but maybe like the center setting on my spray nozzle. That's you want to use something that's got a little force, a little jab to it, so that as the water is rinsing over your plants, it's breaking up that dried Dawn dish detergent, and it like flakes off these really satisfying pieces of like sooty mold clumps from your plants. So that's typically what I do as a sooty mold treatment. When you start bringing your citrus trees inside for the winter, you can also get some common houseplant pest issues like mealybugs or fungus gnats. So just make sure that you're not overwatering when you bring your citrus inside, and make sure that you don't put it next to an air vent. Those are the two biggest suggestions, or the two biggest tips that I have for overwintering citrus. And like I mentioned earlier in this episode, if you are interested in getting one of my downloadable resources for overwintering citrus, be sure to check today's show notes for that. Okay, well, that wraps up our episode on the Rutaceae plant family. In next week's episode, I am going to be sharing with you some tips for the fall transition, how to plan for fall, and how to make some of those difficult decisions with your remaining summer vegetables and getting the things in that you want for fall and winter. So that's what we're going to talk about in next week's episode. I'm super excited. I love fall, and it's just right around the corner. Our first day of fall is the 22nd of September this year, and I am so ready. I'm so ready for the cooler weather. I'm ready to pull out my scarves and my boots. I love fall so much. So next week, we'll talk about that fall transition for our growing spaces. And if you have listened to this podcast in the past, then you'll know that at the end of every episode, I like to sign off with a little tidbit, a little morsel of information, if you will. Today, I want to talk about comfrey. Is anyone else familiar with comfrey? Anyone else growing comfrey? It's a great medicinal herb, not super great for eating, but it's got a lot of medicinal benefits. And comfrey is a great source of plant-based nitrogen, which of course feeds our leafy greens, which we're planting in abundance in the fall. So comfrey is a really great nitrogen-rich plant. You can use the leaves as mulch even within your raised beds or your containers. You can make a comfrey tea by drying out the leaves, or even just using fresh leaves and mixing them with some water, letting it steep. Gets a little funky. I'll give you a heads up. But comfrey is a delicious plant to have in your growing space, and it is super restorative and super supportive for you medicinally and your plants. So if you have never heard of comfrey before, check it out. I'll put some information about comfrey in the show notes for you as well. It would be a great addition to your space. And in the spring and fall, it blooms these really cute purple flowers that the bees just love. They're really deep, kind of like jewel tone purples. Oh, they're gorgeous. So anyway, that's your fun little tidbit for today. And I will see you back here next week to talk all about the fall transition in your growing space and how to get a new round of plants started for a new season. Take care.
Thanks again for tuning into this week's episode of the Growing Space Podcast. I hope that you learned something new and that you were able to take this new information home with you and implement into your growing journey and into your growing space. As always, I am here to support you in your food growing journey. If you'd like to learn more about the different services and resources and membership programs that I run through the Patio Farmer, please check out my website, thepatiofarmer.com. You can also follow me on social media. I am on Facebook, Instagram, and oh my gosh, most recently, TikTok. Wow. I know. Here I am. Patio Farmer is on TikTok. It's very exciting. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give it a like or a rating or a review if you want. Maybe share a little comment about your favorite part of the episode. Share it with a friend. The more interactions I get with my little podcast online, the more I'm able to help people just like you in their food growing journeys. As always, thanks for being here, and I will see you again next week.